we're going to start out with a few tools. I take a piece of 1x2 and affix a razor blade to it to use as a height guide, and both halves of my my stove are going to be based on the 1x2. If you want to make a taller stove with more capacity, you can do a stack of them, but I found that just to be unnecessary because I get plenty of boil and simmer time with just the short stove. So, simple, and wash out your can. If you don't have any residue in there, line it up with your cutting surface here. Get yourself a nice flat surface and begin to rotate the can and slowly score all the way around. And this takes a couple minutes, but you wind up with a much cleaner edge than if you tried to cut it with any kind of scissors or a knife right away. Well, once you get it started, you can usually just twist it apart and it'll break where it's scored most of the way through. Before you cut your top half of the stove is going to be to punch your holes in the top ring that are going to be your gas jets for the alcohol vapor. You're going to want some sort of template. I've got a little template that I got, I think, from the Zen Stoves site, and I prefer the 24 small holes. And just tape that to the top. It's just got 24 equally spaced radial lines, and you'll just punch a hole in the edge of the can at the end of each one of those lines, about halfway from the edge to, or from halfway along the silver piece here. For that, I use a special tool, which is just a Dremel or a X-Acto knife handle with a needle pinched into the spot that would normally hold the blade. Alright, so this is just a little bit of a tedious process of finding the start point you're going to use, applying some pressure, and there are your 24 pinholes. Alright.
Exact same process, no need to show that. Go ahead and slide your cutting tool over here so I can show a close-up of that.
There you go.
Right, now that we have 3 Dr. Pepper can bottoms, we move on to the next step, which is...
The next step is going to be to make the bottom piece of the stove. With my model stove here, you can see that's not my model stove. You can see there's really 3 parts to the stove. You have the bottom half, the top half, which has the holes drilled in it or punched in it. This is an old design. Inner wall, which divides the stove into 2 chambers. It needs to fit tightly into the inner edge of the top piece, where it'll be glued upon assembly. It's got notches cut around the outside so that fluid can flow from the inner chamber to the outer chamber at the bottom, but not at the top.
Notches. I can barely see them, but yeah.
And then those 2 pieces have to fit nicely together. The top piece fits inside of the bottom piece, and then they're glued together on final assembly. Now the problem is, both those pieces are exactly the same size, and if you wanted to fit them one inside the other, you'd either have to cut or buckle one of the pieces. I don't like that. It's not as clean, so what we do is we make a dilator tool, which is simply another full soda can, same type you're using. I like Dr. Pepper. And you take another section of can like one of the ones you've cut, but I use a taller one so you get a little room for error. That's 2 1x2s tall. You drill a hole in the bottom of that piece.
And then shotgun the Dr. Pepper. Actually, no, you got to pull the tab to do it.
You drill a hole in the bottom of your cut piece before you make your dilator tool, and that way you don't get a pneumatic cushion of air, because then you take your full can of soda and you jam it down into your cut soda can piece with the hole drilled in it. Now that is never coming off of there. It's pressure fit on there and it's not moving. So what you do is then polish that to a mirror finish. Just use some aluminum wheel polish. Get the
viewers
label.
can actually see a distorted reflection of me in it from this angle.
Don't lie, that's the real reflection. And so now that you've got that dilator tool made, you've got it polished to a nice mirror finish on half of the stove, and you can now make this piece larger in diameter with your dilator tool. As simply as just putting your body weight onto it and pushing down. It's kind of got to be careful not to widen it too much, but you want to make sure you get it wide enough to fit the top piece into it. So you kind of wiggle it around a little bit, side to side, kind of making a rotating movement. And because it's such a perfect seal, you get a pneumatic cushion of air here that keeps it from getting stuck. When you push down, that air pressure is pushing back and it comes off pretty easily each time, but if you had a hole in here you'd never get it off again. So now just do a little test fit, and it doesn't want to go perfectly yet, so give it just a little more. Have a nice tight fit when you finally assemble it. And that'll do perfectly. They want to seat together. Don't push them together too hard or it will buckle, because you only kind of dilated the first couple millimeters of it where they're going to fit together. And that is the next step.
Did you invent that step yourself, or did you get it from a guide?
I did not. These are all, a lot of these techniques are from a guy who has a website with quite a few different alcohol stove designs. I believe it's Zen and the Art of the Alcohol Stove. So, gotta give credit where credit is due. All of this is either from or a modified version of the Zen Masters alcohol stove techniques.
Links in the sidebar, or the info bar if you have the new player. And action! He just did a practice step because he doesn't remember how to do this.
It's been a while since I made my last one of these stoves. So, again, going to go off the model here. The next piece we're going to make is the inner wall, which is just simply a strip of the piece of the can that we've got left over with a couple notches cut in the bottom of it, and then a couple notches cut so that you can just clip it to itself and create a continuous band. So, the way we're going to make that, start out making your rough cut. You've got already a smooth edge to go off of here, so one of your sides is already perfectly straight. And find either the seam of the label or one of the sides of the nutritional information, whatever, to get yourself a nice clean cut straight up the can. And then somewhere, you know, halfway up the sidewall or more, go ahead and just cut around it. So you'll have the beginnings of the strip that we're going to use. So now you've got yourself a strip of aluminum can, and the height you want to get so that everything seats together properly and you've got a nice strong stove when you're finished. So you're putting pressure on both the outer wall and the inner wall, is just about 1 millimeter shy of the width of your 1x2 that you used for cutting. I took a Sharpie, just marked off about 1 millimeter in, and I'll now just take that, actually use as my template here, to mark off where I'm going to cut the inner wall strip. And now you're just going to cut along that. Make sure to cut on the right side of the mark you just made, so you don't make it too tall or too short. I guess you couldn't make it too short that way.